Wars throughout history have often been brutal, tragic, and destructive, but some have stood out for their sheer scale of adventure, bold strategies, and extraordinary feats. They've pushed the limits of human courage, endurance, and ingenuity. In this video, we'll explore 5 of the most adventure-filled wars in history, conflicts that not only shaped the world, but also left behind stories that read like epic sagas. The Trojan War, a mythic adventure. Let's kick things off with one of the most legendary wars in history, the Trojan War. This war is as much myth as it is history, but it's impossible to deny the adventurous spirit of the stories that have come out of it. Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, immortalized this war, which is believed to have taken place around the 12th century BCE. At the heart of this conflict was the abduction of Helen, the Queen of Sparta, by Paris, a prince of Troy. What followed was a decade-long siege filled with daring exploits, massive battles, and of course, the famous Trojan horse. The Greek heroes, Achilles, Odysseus, and Ajax, became legends for their bravery and cunning. Achilles' invincibility, except for his infamous heel, Odysseus' cleverness, and the sheer spectacle of thousands of warriors clashing in front of the towering walls of Troy all make this war feel like something straight out of an adventure novel. And let's not forget the Trojan horse itself, one of the greatest tricks in military history. After years of fighting, the Greeks appeared to retreat, leaving behind a giant wooden horse. Inside, a group of elite Greek soldiers hid. The Trojans, thinking it was a peace offering, brought the horse inside their city walls. That night, the Greek soldiers emerged, opened the gates for their comrades, and Troy was sacked. A tale of adventure, deception, and strategy. This war is one for the ages. The Crusades, a holy war. Across continents. Next up, we have the Crusades, a series of religious wars that spanned nearly 2 centuries, starting in 1096. The Crusades were driven by the desire of European Christians to reclaim the Holy Land, especially Jerusalem, from Muslim control. What makes the Crusades an adventure is not just the scale but the sheer number of people involved and the incredible distances they traveled. Thousands of knights, soldiers, and even ordinary people journeyed from Europe to the Middle East, enduring treacherous terrain, starvation, disease, and relentless fighting. The First Crusade, in particular, was full of remarkable moments of heroism and horror. The Siege of Jerusalem in 1099 was a bloody climax, with the Crusaders fighting their way through the city's walls in a violent, chaotic battle. But there were also moments of diplomacy, cunning, and surprise, like the use of siege towers and battering rams to overcome fortifications. The Crusades were also notable for their cultural and intellectual exchanges. While the wars were often brutal, they also led to the blending of European and Middle Eastern cultures. Crusaders encountered advanced medical knowledge, new trade routes, and even architectural innovations like fortifications and castles, many of which they brought back to Europe. For many of the knights and soldiers involved, the Crusades were not just about religion. They were also about adventure, exploration, and the promise of wealth and glory. The call of the unknown, the dangers of distant lands, and the thrill of battle all made the Crusades one of the most adventurous wars in history. The Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon's grand adventure. Fast forward to the early 19th century, and we find ourselves in the midst of the Napoleonic Wars. These wars, which spanned from 1803 to 1815, pitted the French Empire, led by the ambitious and charismatic Napoleon Bonaparte, against a series of coalitions made up of European powers like Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. Napoleon's military genius and the sheer scale of his campaigns made this period one of the most thrilling and adventurous in history. Napoleon's most famous campaign was his invasion of Russia in 1812. With an army of over 600,000 men, the largest Europe had ever seen, Napoleon set out to conquer the vast Russian Empire. But what started as a seemingly unstoppable march turned into a harrowing adventure of survival. The Russian winter, along with scorched earth tactics employed by the retreating Russian forces, decimated Napoleon's army. By the time he retreated, only a fraction of his men had survived. It was a disaster for Napoleon, but a remarkable adventure of endurance and survival for those who lived through it. Another highlight of the Napoleonic Wars was the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, where the British Navy, under Admiral Horatio Nelson, faced off against a combined French and Spanish fleet. Nelson's daring tactics and refusal to retreat turned the tide of the battle, ensuring British naval supremacy for the rest of the war. Whether it was Napoleon's audacious crossing of the Alps, his campaigns in Egypt, or his final defeat at Waterloo, the Napoleonic Wars were full of high-stakes drama, daring maneuvers, and grand adventure on an epic scale. World War II, a global adventure. It's impossible to talk about adventure-filled wars without mentioning World War II, one of the most all-encompassing and impactful conflicts in human history. From 1939 to 1945, the world was engulfed in a war that stretched across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. While it's remembered for its horrific atrocities, it's also full of incredible stories of courage, strategy, and adventure. One of the most daring operations of the war was the D-Day invasion of Normandy in 1944. Known as Operation Overlord, it was the largest amphibious assault in history. Thousands of Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, facing entrenched German forces and a deadly web of machine guns, artillery, and mines. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Allies broke through, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. On the other side of the world, in the Pacific theater, the war was just as adventurous. The island-hopping strategy employed by the United States to defeat Japan was a series of grueling and perilous battles fought on remote islands. Each battle was a life-or-death struggle, often fought in dense jungles, treacherous mountains, and unforgiving seas. The Battle of Midway, in particular, was a turning point, where a combination of intelligence, strategy, and luck allowed the US to deal a crippling blow to the Japanese Navy. World War II was also a war of innovation, with new technologies like radar, jet engines, and atomic bombs forever changing the nature of warfare. The daring commando raids, espionage missions behind enemy lines, and the resistance movements that sprung up across Europe all add to the adventurous nature of this war. The American Revolution, a fight for freedom. Finally, let's turn to the American Revolution, a war that not only gave birth to a nation, but also featured one of the most adventurous and inspiring stories of perseverance against all odds. Fought between 1775 and 1783, the American Revolution pitted the 13 American colonies against the British Empire, then the most powerful military force in the world. The Revolutionary War was full of daring exploits and heroic feats. George Washington's crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas night in 1776 is one of the most iconic moments of the war. In a surprise attack, Washington's forces braved icy waters, harsh winter conditions, and exhaustion to launch a successful raid on the Hessian forces in Trenton, New Jersey. It was a bold and risky move that turned the tide of the war in favor of the Americans. The war was also a test of endurance. The Continental Army, made up of mostly untrained and poorly equipped soldiers, faced brutal winters, food shortages, and a well-organized British force. But their tenacity, combined with the aid of French forces and the brilliant strategies of commanders like Washington, allowed them to outlast the British. The final victory came at the Siege of Yorktown in 1781, where Washington's forces, along with French troops, surrounded the British Army, forcing their surrender. The adventure of fighting for freedom, against all odds, with a small, scrappy army taking on a global superpower, is what makes the American Revolution one of the most inspiring wars in history. If you liked that video, so watch video number 6, you will also like this one.